Real escalation, not imagined escalation, comes from China and Iran. Russia has received new ballistic projectiles from Iran, prompting the US and Europe to impose new sanctions. The supply of weapons by Iran to its ally Russia has major implications and ought to place a far greater burden on allies to protect Ukraine. But are they doing anything meaningful apart from the usual condemnations and reiterations of unenforced red lines? Russia has received new and highly deadly ballistic weapons from Iran and is likely to use them in Ukraine, said the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The statement was made during his trip to London last Tuesday as he prepared to travel with the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy to Kyiv. An announcement on long-range weapons for Ukraine to counter this threat was expected, but never came. Iran's supply of weapons is a genuine escalation of the conflict. Ukraine's defense of its sovereign territory usually gets accused of being escalation, but what Iran and China are doing is the real escalation of the conflict, and the West's reaction is dithering and timidity once again. It's thought that these new munitions may have huge significance to the battlefield balance ahead of the winter, which of course is intense in this part of the world. The US and Europe have imposed new sanctions on Iran, but these have not had any deterrent impact either on Russia's aggression or of Iran's close support for its ally. Pressure is building on the US to end its restrictions on Ukraine using British supplied Storm Shadows to strike targets deep into Russia and not just in the occupied parts of Ukraine. But so far, the Biden administration has stubbornly refused to relent, showing them pretty much in the same light as Scholz's dogmatic intransigence around the Taurus system. When asked about a decision, Blinken defers and obfuscates, citing Ukraine's ability to maintain the systems training and their strategic purpose. He also questions the fallacy of seeing these systems as a silver bullet. But that's not what Ukraine is asking for. We know what the systems are for. Their strategic purpose is absolutely clear. Prevent Russia from slaughtering Ukrainians at will and degrading the energy infrastructure ahead of the winter. These weapons will be effective in pursuing these goals. They're also there to support Ukraine's Kursk offensive so it can maintain pressure on the brittle Russian regime and expand its powerful bargaining chip ahead of potential peace talks and discussions. The delay on the US side to decide on this is clearly now in contravention of its allies' wishes, that is, Britain. It is enabling the murder of Ukrainians daily, and it is weakening Ukraine's hand in any future negotiating process, or even a unilateral withdrawal of Russian forces. The US is protecting the wrong sky and is putting a higher premium on ring fencing or protecting Russian launch sites and air bases than it is on protecting Ukraine and its precious civilian lives. Ultimately, the debate turns on whether sanctioning Storm Shadow for use deep inside Russia would be seen as an escalatory step by Putin or just another hollow threat by the dictator. Blinken insists the US position remains to provide Ukraine with the weapons it wants at the time it wants, but this is patently untrue to any observer or rational individual, as well as informed experts. Ukrainian President's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak, said applying sanctions on Iran was not enough, and Kyiv needs permission to strike deeper into Russia. Biden has allowed Ukraine to fire US-provided missiles across the border into Russia in self-defense, but limited the distance over concerns about escalation. Russia made similar threats then as it is now, but those were shown to be hollow and came to nothing. More bluffing, in fact. The strategic decision was likely raised in a deeper discussion between Keir Starmer and Biden in Washington last Friday, when the two leaders assessed the whole Western strategy towards Ukraine, including how Kyiv can survive the winter and whether Zelensky and his new cabinet have a credible plan to defeat Russia. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, has called for a peace conference to be attended by Moscow under domestic pressure, which can be interpreted as a sign of wavering support for Ukraine in parts of Europe. But Blinken's confirmation that the Iran move is seen as a significant escalation may end up altering the debate. Germany, France, and the UK indeed have strongly condemned Iran. The munitions being provided to Russia are of the relatively new FATH 360 or BM 120 type, and they are not the longest range weapons. Ukraine has claimed that more than 200 FATH 360 short range ballistic projectiles were sent to a Russian Caspian seaport. Blinken suggested that the supply of Iranian missiles would enable Russia to use more of its own arsenal for targets further from the front line in Ukraine. This development and the growing cooperation between Russia and Iran threaten European security and demonstrate how Iran's destabilizing influence reaches far beyond the Middle East, he said. Blinken claimed dozens of Russian military personnel have trained in Iran on the FATH 360 system, which has a range of 19 to 75 miles and can carry a 150-kilogram warhead and can be launched at a speed of Mach 3, that is 2,300 miles per hour, or 3 times the speed of sound. Blinken challenged any suggestion the new Iranian government wanted a new relationship with the West. We've warned Iran privately that taking this step would constitute a dramatic escalation. Russia has now received shipment of these ballistic missiles and will likely use them within weeks in Ukraine against Ukrainians. Iran's new president and foreign minister have repeatedly said that they want to restore engagement with Europe. They want to relieve sanctions. Destabilizing actions like these will achieve exactly the opposite, he said. Iran has, of course, denied all these allegations to the UN. The provision of ballistic systems, if used by Russia in Ukraine, will be readily identifiable, the CIA director William Burns said at the weekend at an event in London. The UK always declines to comment on any internal disagreements with the US, but Starmer's government is coming under intense pressure to reverse what is seen as an extremely weak decision not to make an announcement on the use of Storm Shadow on the territory of Russia. Former Defense Secretary Grant Shapps said, "We've remained cautious about allowing our Ukrainian allies to target the source of these attacks on Russian territory, but the UK must issue a straightforward warning to Putin. If you continue to murder men, women, and children with glide bombs launched from Russia, then we will lead the rest of the world to authorize our long-range weapons to take out your launchers." It has been claimed that US intelligence has confirmed the use of Iranian-made drones in Ukraine through photographic analysis and other means, and Ukrainian officials previously confirmed Tehran's intention to send other types of ballistics to Russia. In October 2022, 2 senior Iranian officials and 2 diplomats told Reuters Iran had agreed, at Moscow's request, to send Iranian-made Fateh 110 and Zulfagar short-range surface-to-surface ballistic projectiles to Russia. One of the Iranian diplomats attempted to sidestep allegations Iran was fueling Russia's war effort by claiming it was not the seller's issue where Russia decided to use those weapons. In February, 6 sources, including 3 Iranian government sources, told Reuters that Iran had sent roughly 400 projectiles, including many powerful surface-to-surface ballistics, to Russia. Contrary to recent denials, an unnamed Iranian official at the time told Reuters that there would be more such shipments. And this is a similar story to North Korea, which has denied the supply of such weapons, but Ukrainian officials and others have recovered fragments from North Korean Hwasong-11 series munitions throughout Ukraine. Ukrainian officials noted that the North Korean weapons have proven highly unreliable, prompting Russia to seek the higher precision arms from Russia. Of course, the question remains open as to whether the Iranian munitions will prove to be more accurate than the North Korean ones. The Fateh 110 and Zolfaga short-range ballistic projectiles have ranges of 300 kilometers and 700 kilometers respectively, and are classed as strategic. They can strike into the depths of Ukraine, even if launched from Russian territory, which of course is another concern. The range of the Zolfaga is slightly more than the Russian Iskander, so they could be used to target critical infrastructure over the entire country. Even the shortest range Iranian ballistics could reach cities such as Kharkiv, located just 30 kilometers from Russia's border. It's also been claimed that due to Iran's extensive weapons program, they are capable of delivering in quantity, quotes. Even so, Russia is not expected to run out of its own ballistic munitions anytime soon. More strikes will only place more stress on Ukraine's already stretched air defenses, as these types of projectiles are far more difficult to intercept than the cruise variant. Due to their high speed, sometimes more than 3,200 kilometers per hour, only the most advanced air defense systems can shoot them down, the US-made Patriot system being one of those. Ukraine has at least 4 Patriots, while Zelensky has said that it needs up to 25 to protect the skies over the entire country. Ukraine has the Patriot defense system, but the number of interceptors are limited, so that could potentially be a challenge if you have large numbers of Iranian projectiles, he said. This is an expensive challenge as well, and it highlights the strategic flaw of the Western policy in targeting the arrows, but not the archer. One Patriot interceptor costs from $2 million to $4 million, roughly the same price as the ballistic objects that they are shooting down. In a related story, the US has accused China of giving very substantial help to Russia's war machine. In exchange, it is claimed that China is getting top secret Russian military tech. Beijing is giving Moscow substantial help to maintain its war machine, it is alleged. What is China getting in return? Because there always is a quid pro quo. Russia may be handing over closely guarded military tech on submarines, the United States Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell said. The US previously focused on Beijing's supply of dual-use technologies, which can be applied for military and civilian purposes. Now, Washington is unambiguously saying that China is aiding the Russian military and therefore the war effort. These are not dual-use capabilities, Campbell said, referring to the latest materials China is giving Russia. These are basically being applied directly to the Russian war machine. There are component pieces of a very substantial effort on the part of China to help sustain, build, and diversify various elements of the Russian war machine, he said. We're seeing efforts at the highest levels of both governments to try and hide and protect certain elements of this collaboration. China has frequently issued statements denying that it is supplying Russia with arms, insisting it does not provide either side with weapons and has an impartial position on the war. That is no longer a credible statement, if indeed it was ever credible in the first place. According to Campbell, the new technologies Beijing is receiving from Russia will pose a danger not just to the US, but also to India, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. US authorities have been ramping up pressure on Europe to respond more assertively to Beijing's support for Moscow. But at the same time, the US is hyper cautious on enabling Ukraine to fight back. Well, this makes no sense. It gives out not only the wrong signals to Russia, it gives out entirely the wrong signals to China as well. And what's the cost of these delays and indecision? Well, it's clear daily, such as the damaging and lethal strike on Kharkiv this weekend. Zelensky has rightly said that Western arms arriving too slowly are causing Ukrainian troops to suffer high losses on the battlefield as well as civilian losses. The only way to counter this Russian terror is through a systemic solution, he said, long-range capabilities to destroy Russian military aviation at its bases, at the source, Zelensky said. But Western policy is not providing an effective deterrence, let alone halting Russia's aggression, which seems to be on an escalation autopilot and has been since the very start of the invasion. This last story suggests why our tolerance for aggressive autocrats and their crimes will only amplify our problems in future years and accelerate the costs of dealing with the fallout. There are growing fears in the UK and US as well of a secret nuclear deal between Iran and Russia. Intelligence suggests that new nuclear cooperation between those allies and adds to concerns over Tehran's rising uranium stockpile. Giving dictators a safe space to cooperate on the instruments of destruction and cooperate in inflicting suffering and violence with impunity only emboldens them to scale up their assaults on their perceived enemies. In the UK, these delays show how absolutely out of touch the government is in terms of providing long-range weapons, as the leader of Britain's third party, Sir Ed Davey, unequivocally called for Ukraine to be allowed to use the West's long-range capabilities to attack Russian military bases. It seems that both opposition parties absolutely understand what needs to be done and have a sense of urgency. Hopefully, the UK government will pick up on this. The time to grasp this nettle is long overdue and cannot wait until after the US elections are over. The range of autocrats lining up against Ukraine and the resources they are putting at the disposal of Russia makes a mockery of US power and policies. Allies need to realize that Ukrainian materials, willpower, and bodies are not infinite, and stop pursuing policies that are letting Ukraine bleed out, while preventing them from fighting back adequately against Russia, the aggressor.